This is my meeting." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. I watched my husband David's face drain of color as he stared at me across the polished mahogany table. 52 years old, and this was the first time in 28 years of marriage that I'd seen him truly speechless. The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of the projector displaying my company's billion-dollar portfolio on the wall behind me. My daughter Sarah dropped her phone, the clatter echoing through the room filled with board members, reporters, and my family who had walked into what they thought was just lunch. Harrison Ford, the CEO I just outmaneuvered, stood frozen at the far end of the table, his mouth agape. "Mom?" Sarah's voice cracked, barely a whisper. 7 years. 7 years of living this double life, of being dismissed as nothing more than a housewife while secretly building an empire. And now, in this moment, watching their faces transform from confusion to shock to something resembling awe, I felt the weight of all those hidden years finally lifting from my shoulders. But let me tell you how it all began. How Margaret Maggie Thompson, the woman they called basic, boring, and past her prime, became the most powerful person in this room. Flashback the beginning. It started 28 years ago when I was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in economics and dreams bigger than the small town bank where I worked. David was 31 then, ambitious and charming, working his way up in the same institution. He seemed so confident, so sure of himself and our future. "You're brilliant, Maggie," he used to tell me during our courtship. "Together, we're going to conquer the world." I believed him. God, how I believed him. When Sarah was born, David suggested I take maternity leave. "Just for a few months," he said, stroking my hair as I held our sleeping daughter. "We can afford it, and Sarah needs her mother." A few months turned into years. Every time I mentioned returning to work, David had a reason why it wasn't the right time. Sarah needed me. The economy was unstable. His career was taking off, and someone needed to manage the household. "You're so good at this," he'd say, gesturing around our perfectly maintained home. "Why would you want to go back to that stressful office environment when you have everything you need here?" By the time Sarah turned 5, I realized the truth. David didn't want a partner. He wanted a supporting character in his story. Present day, the kitchen island. "Mom, you're being so clingy right now." Sarah didn't even look up from her laptop as she spoke, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked on what she claimed was her thesis, but looked suspiciously like social media scrolling. At 25, she was pursuing her MBA while living at home, and every conversation we had lately ended with her explaining how different things were for women of her generation. I was arranging fresh flowers in the vase on our kitchen island, the same spot where I'd served countless family meals, helped with homework, and listened to their problems for decades. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Bob Chen with updates on the Ford Industries acquisition, but I couldn't check it now. "I'm not being clingy," I said carefully, adjusting a particularly stubborn lily. "I just thought you might want some lunch before your interview this afternoon." Sarah finally looked up, and I caught a flash of something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Actually, about that interview." She glanced toward the hallway where David's voice could be heard on a work call. "Could you maybe not mention it to Dad yet?" "Why not?" It's just, it's at a startup. Like, a really small one. And you know how Dad gets about secure positions and established companies." She made air quotes, rolling her eyes. "He'll just lecture me about how your generation had it easier because you could afford to take risks since you had husbands to fall back on." The irony wasn't lost on me. If only she knew that her father's secure position as branch manager at the local bank brought in less than half of what I made in a typical month through my investment firm. If only she knew that the small startup she was interviewing with had already received a pre-approval for Series A funding from my company. "Your generation did have it easier though, didn't it?" Sarah continued, closing her laptop. "I mean, you got to choose between career and family. We have to do everything at once. Be perfect at everything." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd been swallowing for years every time they reduced my life to simple choices and easy paths. Sarah had no idea that I was facing the challenges of menopause while running board meetings, or that I'd spent the previous night on a conference call with Tokyo investors while prepping her favorite lasagna for dinner. I suppose I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Some things were simpler then. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Bob was probably wondering why I wasn't responding to what was likely the most important business day of my career so far. Are you going to get that? Sarah asked, noticing my distraction. It's probably just your father's dry cleaner, I lied smoothly, reminding me about pickup time. Sarah nodded, already returning to her laptop. That's what I mean. Simple stuff like that. We don't have people to handle the little things for us. I bit my tongue, wanting to tell her that I'd been handling both the little things and the big ones like the $40 million acquisition that would be announced tomorrow, but instead I just smiled and excused myself to check my messages. Flashback, the awakening. The moment everything changed happened 7 years ago, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. David had left early for a district manager's meeting, and Sarah was away at college. I was sitting in my home office, David called it my craft room, paying bills and managing our household finances. That's when I saw it. David's investment portfolio statement, mixed in with the utility bills. He'd lost $60,000 in the previous quarter. $60,000 of our savings, gone. Invested in some scheme his golf buddy had recommended without consulting me. Meanwhile, he'd spent the previous month telling me we needed to tighten our belts and suggesting I cancel my subscriptions to the financial publications I read for fun. I stared at that statement for what felt like hours, feeling something shift inside me. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but clarity. David saw me as someone who couldn't be trusted with real decisions, someone whose opinions on investments were cute but irrelevant. That afternoon, I called my old college roommate Kate Williams, who'd become a corporate lawyer. We met at a coffee shop downtown, the same one where we used to study for economics exams 25 years earlier. I need to do something, I told her, sliding David's statement across the table. I can't just sit there and watch him throw away our future while treating me like I'm too stupid to understand money. Kate studied the numbers, her expression growing more serious. Maggie, this is bad. Really bad. But you know that, don't you? I know more than he thinks I do. The words came out harder than I intended. I've been reading, studying, following the markets for years. I think. I think I could do better. Better how? I want to start investing. But not just investing, I want to start my own firm. Small at first, just managing some private portfolios. But I took a deep breath. I think I could be good at this. Really good. Kate was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. You know what? I think you're right. And I know someone who could help. That someone was Bob Chen, a recently retired investment banker looking for new projects. Kate arranged the introduction, and within a week, Bob and I were meeting in secret, developing a business plan that would eventually become Thompson Capital Management. You have good instincts, Bob told me after reviewing my market analyses. And more importantly, you have patience. Too many people in this business want quick returns. The real money comes from playing the long game. The long game. I had no idea how long that game would become or how completely it would transform my life. Present day, the secret off. 20 minutes later, I sat in my downtown office, a space that existed in a completely different universe from my kitchen island world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the walls displayed awards and recognitions that my family had never seen. Bob paced in front of my desk, his excitement barely contained. At 68, he still had the energy of a man half his age, especially when we were closing a major deal. Maggie, this is it, he said, running his hands through his silver hair. Ford Industries board approved the acquisition. They don't even know they just sold their company to a housewife from the suburbs. I allowed myself a small smile. Harrison Ford still thinks he's negotiating with some faceless corporation, doesn't he? He's been trying to identify the mystery buyer for months. Keeps insisting it has to be one of the big players from New York or Silicon Valley. Bob chuckled. He's going to have a stroke when he finds out. My phone rang at David's ringtone. I glanced at Bob, who nodded understandingly. After 7 years of this double life, he knew the drill. Hi, honey, I answered, keeping my voice light and domestic. In the background, I could hear the familiar sounds of the bank, phones ringing, muffled conversations, the endless hum of a small town financial institution where the biggest decisions involved home mortgages and car loans. Did you remember to pick up my prescription? David asked. The pharmacy closes at 6, and I might be stuck here late. Of course, I replied, signing acquisition papers worth more than David would make in 5 years while we spoke. Anything else? No, that's it. Oh, and don't wait up. Jim's taking some of us out for drinks after the quarterly review meeting. Might be a late night. I hung up and looked at Bob, who was shaking his head. 28 years, and he still has no idea. That's because he doesn't want to have an idea, I said, my voice harder than I intended. It's easier to see me as the woman who picks up prescriptions and waits at home than to imagine I might be capable of more. Bob sat down across from my desk, his expression growing serious. Maggie, don't you think it's time? You've proven everything you needed to prove. Thompson Capital Management is worth $4 billion. You personally are worth over $1 billion. You're one of the most successful investors on the East Coast, and your family doesn't even know you work. I turned to look out the window, watching the city move below me. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably complaining to her friends about her boring mother, and David was probably telling his colleagues how lucky he was that his wife was content with such a simple life. I've been thinking about that, I said finally. The way they talk about me, like I'm some relic from a bygone era who's too simple to understand the modern world. It bothers you. It enrages me. I turned back to face him. But more than that, it's made me realize something. I've been hiding not just to protect myself, but to protect their egos. I've been making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate. Ford's lawyers are making noise. They want to meet with the CEO directly. Can't put them off much longer. I showed the message to Bob, who grimaced. We could probably buy ourselves a few more days, but… No, I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. No more delays. Set up a meeting for Thursday. Full board, full press coverage. And Bob? Yes? Make sure my family is there. It's time they met the real Margaret Thompson. Flashback the foundation years. The first year of Thompson Capital Management nearly broke me, though not for the reasons you might think. The business side was challenging but manageable. Bob's connections opened doors. My instincts proved sound, and our early clients saw impressive returns. The real difficulty was maintaining the fiction at home. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn to check Asian markets, then prepare David's breakfast and pack Sarah's lunch before she headed off to high school. I'd wave goodbye from the front door, the picture of domestic contentment, then change into business attire and drive to my office for a full day of client meetings, market research, and strategic planning. By evening, I'd be back home, having somehow transformed back into the supportive wife who asked about David's day and helped Sarah with her homework. I became a master of compartmentalization, keeping my two worlds so separate that sometimes I felt like I was living as two different people. The close calls were constant. The time Sarah found a business magazine in my car and I claimed it was for a book club. The afternoon David came home early and found me on a conference call, and I quickly pretended to be talking to my sister about her divorce. The evening I forgot to hide a financial statement and David found it on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the paper that showed our personal account receiving a six-figure transfer from Thompson Capital Management. My heart stopped. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and somehow anticipating for months. "Oh, that." I forced my voice to remain casual as I stirred the pasta sauce on the stove. "It's from an investment Kate helped me set up. Remember how you lost money on that tech stock Jim recommended? I thought I'd try to make some of it back." David studied the statement more carefully. $60,000? Maggie, how much did you invest? Not much, I lied. Kate has a friend who manages small portfolios for women like me. You know, housewives with a little extra time and money. The dismissive way he said women like me told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't suspicious, he was condescending. In his mind, I was playing with monopoly money, probably getting lucky with some low-risk mutual funds while the real investors did the serious work. Well, As long as it's not interfering with your responsibilities here, he said, setting the statement aside and reaching for a beer. Just don't get too caught up in this stuff. You know how emotional women can get about money. That night, lying in bed next to my husband who had just dismissed my financial acumen while I'd made more money that day than he'd make in 6 months, I made a decision. I wouldn't just hide my success, I'd let them underestimate me so completely that when the truth finally came out, the shock would be absolute. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only way I could protect myself while building something that was truly mine. Present day, this setup, I thought we could do something special as a family next Thursday, I announced over dinner, watching David scroll through his phone while Sarah pushed her food around her plate. The dining room felt smaller than usual, weighted down by years of half conversations and missed connections. David barely looked up from his screen. Mom, I made reservations downtown for lunch, I continued, taking a sip of wine. I thought it might be nice to spend some time together, just the three of us. Sarah's head snapped up. Thursday? Mom, I have that networking event for my program. I can't miss it. There's going to be recruiters from some really important companies there. I smiled, thinking about how the really important companies she was so eager to impress would pale in comparison to what I was about to reveal. Actually, I already spoke with Dr. Martinez about your program schedule. She said missing one networking event wouldn't hurt, especially since you've attended all the others. You what? Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Mom, you can't just call my professors without asking me. I'm 25, not 15, and I have quarterly budget meetings all day Thursday, David interrupted, finally looking up from his phone. Can't we just do this over the weekend? I maintained my calm expression while my heart raced. Actually, I checked with your assistant, Linda. She confirmed your calendar is clear after 11 on Thursday. That got his attention. David set down his phone and stared at me. You called Linda? I wanted to make sure we could all be there. It's important. Important? Sarah scoffed, her voice carrying that particular tone of derision she'd perfected over the years. What could possibly be so important about lunch with you? The words hit like they always did, but this time, instead of swallowing the hurt, I felt a surge of anticipation. In 48 hours, that question would be answered in a way that would change everything between us. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Kate. Ford's team is getting aggressive. They're threatening to go public with accusations of fraud if we don't reveal the buyer's identity. We need to move fast. I kept my expression neutral as I read the message, though internally I was calculating. Ford was getting desperate, which meant we were close to victory. But desperation made people dangerous, and I needed to be ready for whatever he might try. It's a surprise, I said finally, looking directly at Sarah. Trust me, you'll want to be there. Whatever, Sarah muttered, returning her attention to her phone. But if this interferes with my job search, I'm not going to be happy. David had already picked up his phone again, clearly considering the conversation over. Fine, but this better be worth rearranging my whole day. As I cleared the dishes later that evening, I overheard Sarah on the phone with one of her friends in the living room. I know, right? She's being so weird lately, Sarah was saying. Like, suddenly she's making all these mysterious plans and acting like she has some big secret. It's probably just menopause making her dramatic. I paused in the kitchen doorway, listening. My mom's the same way, came the voice through the speaker. They hit 50 and suddenly think they're in some kind of life movie. Mine started a blog about organic gardening and acts like she's saving the world. Both girls laughed, and I felt that familiar burn in my chest. But this time, instead of retreating to my room to absorb the hurt privately, I smiled. Let them laugh. Let them think this was about menopause and middle-aged drama. Thursday would be the most educational day of their lives. Flashback, the moment I knew. There was a specific moment when I realized I could never go back to being just David's wife and Sarah's mother. It happened 3 years into building Thompson Capital Management, during what should have been a family celebration. David had just been promoted to branch manager, a position he'd been working toward for 15 years. He was so proud, and honestly, I was proud of him too. Managing the local branch was a significant responsibility, and he'd earned it through years of dedicated work. We went out to dinner to celebrate a nice restaurant downtown, the kind of place we only visited for special occasions. Sarah was home from college for the weekend, and for once, we felt like a proper family. To David, I said, raising my glass, for all your hard work paying off. To finally reaching the big leagues, Sarah added, grinning at her father. David beamed, accepting the praise he'd earned. But then he turned to me with that particular look I'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was about to say something he considered generous. And to Maggie, he said, for being the perfect support system. Honey, I couldn't have done this without knowing you were taking care of everything at home. It means the world to have a wife who understands that her job is to make my job possible. The restaurant noise seemed to fade away as those words settled over me. Her job is to make my job possible. Not our partnership makes us both stronger or we support each other's dreams. My job, my entire purpose, was to enable his success. That's so sweet, Dad, Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Mom, you're like the ultimate team player. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things. But inside, something was crystallizing. That very morning, I'd closed a deal that netted Thompson Capital Management more money than David would make in his new position over the next 5 years. While he'd been preparing for his interview, I'd been restructuring the portfolios of 3 major clients and consulting on a merger that would reshape an entire industry. But in their minds, my greatest achievement was making his achievements possible. That night, lying in bed listening to David's proud, contented snoring, I made a promise to myself. I would never again minimize my own accomplishments to make space for someone else's ego. And someday soon, they would understand exactly who they'd been underestimating. Present day, the pressure builds. The next morning brought a cascade of urgent calls and messages. Ford Industries' lawyers were getting desperate, Kate reported. They'd been trying to identify the mystery buyer for months, and their client was becoming increasingly unstable. He's threatening to go to the press, Kate told me as we sat in our usual coffee shop, the same place where my journey had begun 7 years earlier. Claims the whole acquisition is fraudulent because we won't reveal the buyer's identity. I stirred my latte, considering. Through the window, I could see Sarah and her friend Emma walking by, probably heading to their favorite boutique. They were laughing about something, looking carefree and young. In 24 hours, Sarah's world would be completely different. Bob arrived looking flustered, sliding into the booth beside Kate. Ford's lost his mind, he announced without preamble. His lawyers are claiming we're some kind of shell corporation, that the whole deal is smoke and mirrors. Let him rant, I said calmly. By tomorrow afternoon, it won't matter what he claims. There's something else, Bob continued, pulling out his tablet. He's called a press conference for this afternoon. Says he's going to expose the fraudulent corporate entity that's trying to steal his company. Kate and I exchanged glances. This was escalating faster than we'd anticipated. Mom? I looked up to see Sarah standing beside our table, shopping bags in hand. She was staring at Bob and Kate with obvious curiosity. What are you doing here? She asked. I thought you were grocery shopping. Just catching up with friends, I said smoothly, though I could see the suspicion in Sarah's eyes. After years of knowing exactly where I was at all times, my recent mysterious behavior was clearly troubling to her. Friends? Sarah's gaze moved between Bob and Kate. Mom, who are these people? Kate jumped in smoothly. I'm Kate Williams. Your mom and I went to college together. And I'm Bob Chen, Bob added, standing to shake Sarah's hand. Old friend of your mother's. Sarah's expression remained skeptical. Old friends. Right, she looked at me directly. Mom, why are you being so weird lately? First the mysterious lunch plans, now secret coffee meetings. What's going on? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from my assistant. Ford's press conference moved up to 3 p.m. Media request pouring in. Need your decision on response strategy. I kept my face neutral as I read, though my pulse quickened. Ford was forcing our hand, trying to control the narrative before we were ready. Nothing's going on, sweetheart, I said to Sarah. Just some neighborhood committee stuff. You know how these things can get complicated. Sarah didn't look convinced, but Emma appeared beside her, eager to continue their shopping expedition. Come on, Sarah. The sales end today. As they walked away, I heard Sarah say to Emma, I swear, my mom's having some kind of midlife crisis. She's acting like she has some big secret life or something. Bob chuckled grimly. If only she knew. She'll know soon enough, I said, pulling out my phone. Kate, call the media. Tell them we'll be making a statement at tomorrow's board meeting. Full press conference, no restrictions. Are you sure about this? Kate asked. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your family, your marriage, everything changes. I thought about Sarah's words midlife crisis, big secret life, and felt a surge of something that was part anger, part anticipation, part relief. I'm sure, I said. It's time they learned who they've been living with. The night before, that evening, I stood in my home office, the room David still called my craft room, staring at the wall of awards and recognitions my family had never seen. Tomorrow, this hidden world would finally intersect with my visible life, and I wasn't sure which version of me would survive the collision. My phone rang. Kate. Ford went through with the press conference, she reported. He's claiming Thompson Capital Management is a fraudulent entity designed to manipulate stock prices. He's demanding a federal investigation. I sank into my desk chair, feeling the weight of 7 years of secrecy pressing down on me. How bad is it? It's not good. He's got the media's attention, and some of his claims are gaining traction. We need to respond, Maggie. We need to show them who's really behind Thompson Capital. Through my office window, I could see David in the backyard, grilling dinner and talking on his phone. He looked relaxed, confident, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. In the kitchen, Sarah was setting the table, probably texting friends about her mother's latest weird behavior. Tomorrow, I said firmly. We do this tomorrow, exactly as planned. Maggie, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. I stood up, straightening my shoulders. For 7 years, I've let them underestimate me. I've made myself invisible so they could feel important. But Ford's tantrum just gave us the perfect stage for the revelation. I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder of documentation of every deal, every successful investment, every moment of triumph they'd never witnessed. Set up the meeting for noon, I continued. Full board, full press coverage, and make sure Ford is there. When he realizes he's been outmaneuvered by a housewife from the suburbs, I want everyone to see his reaction. And your family? I looked out the window again, watching David flip burgers while Sarah laughed at something on her phone. My family, who saw me as background noise in their more important lives. They'll be there too, I said. It's time they met the real Margaret Thompson. Thursday, the revelation. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and crystal clear skies, the kind of day that felt loaded with possibility. I woke before dawn, as I had every day for the past 7 years, but instead of checking market reports, I lay in bed listening to David's steady breathing and thinking about how different our morning routine would be tomorrow. By 7 a.m., I was in the kitchen making David's favorite breakfast, eggs Benedict with fresh hollandaise sauce. It would probably be the last time I performed this particular ritual, and I wanted it to be perfect. Smells amazing, David said, appearing in the doorway already dressed for work. At 55, he still looked good in his banker's uniform of conservative suit and understated tie. Special occasion? Just felt like doing something nice, I replied, plating his eggs with the precision I'd learned from countless mornings of domestic performance. Sarah wandered in wearing her interview outfit, a sharp blazer and pencil skirt that made her look every inch the MBA candidate she was becoming. Mom, you didn't have to go all out. I'm too nervous to eat much anyway. Nervous about what? David asked, settling at the kitchen island with his breakfast. Sarah shot me a look. The networking thing I had to skip for Mom's mysterious lunch. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the same feeling I carried for 7 years every time they discussed my life as if it was inconsequential. But today, instead of swallowing it, I smiled. It won't be mysterious much longer, I said. An hour later, we were in David's car heading downtown. I'd insisted on driving together, claiming I wanted to enjoy the family time, but really I needed to control the timing. Bob and Kate would be waiting, along with the board members, the press, and Harrison Ford, who still had no idea what was about to hit him. I still don't understand why we're having lunch in the business district, David said, navigating through downtown traffic. There are plenty of nice restaurants closer to home. Sometimes it's good to get out of our comfort zone, I replied, watching the familiar skyline approach. In less than an hour, I would walk into that conference room and end 7 years of pretending to be less than I was. Sarah was checking her phone in the back seat. Mom, seriously, what's this about? You've been acting weird for weeks. I caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. What kind of weird? I don't know. Different. Like you have some big secret or something. She laughed, but there was an edge to it. Emma thinks you're having a midlife crisis. David chuckled. Maybe she's planning to tell us she's taking up skydiving or something. Or maybe she's been having an affair. Sarah added, clearly joking but watching my reaction carefully. The irony was almost overwhelming. An affair would have been simpler to explain than the truth. No affairs, I said lightly. But you're right about the secret. We pulled into the parking garage of my office building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that housed some of the city's most successful businesses. David looked around with mild interest. Fancy building, he commented. What restaurant did you say we were going to? I didn't, I replied, leading them toward the elevator bank. But we're not going to a restaurant. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor passed in silence. I could feel David and Sarah exchanging glances behind me, their confusion growing with each passing floor. When the doors opened to reveal the Thompson Capital Management logo emblazoned on the wall, David stopped short. Maggie, I think we're in the wrong place. No, I said, walking confidently toward the conference room where I could see people gathering through the glass walls. We're exactly where we need to be. The moment of truth continued. The conference room fell silent as we entered. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below us, but all eyes were focused on the family drama unfolding at the head of the mahogany table. Bob stood up from his seat near the presentation screen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Margaret Thompson, founder and CEO of Thompson Capital Management. The silence that followed was deafening. David's hand was still on my arm from when he tried to steer me out of the room, but his grip had gone slack. Sarah's mouth was open, her phone forgotten in her hand. Harrison Ford, the man I'd been quietly outmaneuvering for months, stared at me with an expression of complete disbelief. This is impossible, he sputtered. You're just a housewife. I met you at that charity gala 3 years ago. Your husband works at some small-town bank. My husband does work at a bank, I confirmed, walking to my chair at the head of the table. And I am a housewife. I'm also the CEO of a $4 billion investment firm that just acquired your company. The reporters in the back of the room began scribbling frantically. Camera flashes started going off. Sarah sank into an empty chair, her face pale. This has to be some kind of joke, David said, his voice strained. Maggie, what's going on? I nodded to Bob, who activated the presentation screen. Immediately, the room filled with the light from charts and graphs showing Thompson Capital Management's growth over the past 7 years. Our client list. Our successful acquisitions. Our market performance that had consistently outpaced industry standards. 7 years ago, I began, addressing the room but keeping my eyes on my family. I started this company with a simple goal to prove that success isn't about who you appear to be, but about what you're actually capable of. I clicked to the next slide, showing our first year's performance. While everyone thought I was taking cooking classes and having coffee with friends, I was building something that would eventually reshape entire industries. Another click. Another year of unprecedented growth. Every morning, I would wake up before dawn to check Asian markets, then make breakfast and pack lunches and send my family off to their important days. Every afternoon, I would return home from closing multi-million-dollar deals to ask about homework and plan dinner menus. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. All those times you said you were running errands. I was running errands, I replied. Errands that involved acquiring companies, restructuring portfolios, and building an empire that none of you thought I was capable of understanding, let alone creating. Harrison Ford slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. I refused to believe that some suburban housewife. Careful, Harrison, I interrupted, my voice carrying a steel that made him step back. That suburban housewife just bought your company out from under you. And if you'd like to know how, I'd be happy to walk you through every strategic move you failed to see coming. I clicked to the next presentation slide, a detailed breakdown of Ford Industries' vulnerabilities that I'd been exploiting for months. Your company's debt to equity ratio made you vulnerable to exactly the kind of leveraged buyout I specialized in, I continued, addressing Ford but aware that my family was hanging on every word. Your board was frustrated with your leadership, especially after the pension fund scandal you thought you buried. Ford's face went white. How could you possibly know about? I know because I do my homework, Harrison. Something you might have tried before dismissing me as just another charity wife who should stick to planning fundraisers. The reporters were having a field day. I could see them frantically texting and tweeting, spreading the story of the mystery CEO who'd been hiding in plain sight. David finally found his voice. Maggie, I don't understand. How is this possible? When did you? How did you? I turned to face him fully. This man I'd been married to for 28 years, who had never once asked me what I did with my days or wondered if I might be capable of more than managing his household. Do you remember 7 years ago when you lost $60,000 of our savings on Jim's investment tip? I asked. David's face flushed. That was different. That was. That was the day I realized I couldn't trust you with our financial future, I said simply. So I took control of it myself. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You've been lying to us for 7 years? I've been protecting you, I corrected. Protecting you from having to acknowledge that the woman you dismissed as boring and basic was actually more successful than both of you combined. The hurt in my voice surprised even me. 7 years of buried resentment was finally surfacing. Every time you rolled your eyes at my simple life, every time you told your friends about your mother who just bakes cookies and watches TV, every time you acted embarrassed by my existence, I was closing deals that would fund your education, your lifestyle, your future. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. I stood up, feeling the full weight of my authority for the first time in my family's presence. You meant every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every time you treated me like I was an inconvenience in your more important lives. David was staring at the presentation screen, where our company's portfolio was still displayed. $4 billion, he said quietly. You're worth $4 billion. The company is worth $4 billion, I corrected. My personal net worth is approximately $1.2 billion. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. Sarah sat back down heavily. That house in Aspen you wanted last summer, Sarah? The one I said we couldn't afford? I continued. I own it. I own the entire development. I said we couldn't afford it because I didn't want to raise questions about where our money was really coming from. Kate stepped forward from where she'd been observing near the back of the room. If I may, she said, addressing the reporters, Mrs. Thompson's success isn't just impressive in terms of numbers. She built this company while maintaining a full-time domestic schedule, attending every school event, cooking family dinners, and handling all household management. She essentially worked 2 full-time jobs for 7 years. Why? David asked, and for the first time, I heard genuine confusion rather than defensiveness in his voice. Why hide it? Why not tell us? I looked at him, or really looked at him, this man who had spent our entire marriage assuming I was less capable, less intelligent, less valuable than him. Because you wouldn't have let me, I said simply. That's not true, isn't it? I clicked to another slide, showing Thompson Capital's first-year performance. Do you remember what you said when I suggested investing in tech stocks 7 years ago? David's face went pale. He remembered. You told me to stick to what I was good at and leave the real business to the men, I continued. You literally patted my head like I was a child who'd suggested something cute but impractical. Sarah was staring at her father with an expression I'd never seen before. Dad, you didn't really say that. It wasn't like that, David stammered. I was just trying to protect. You were trying to protect your ego, I interrupted. Just like you've been doing for 28 years. Every time I showed interest in business, every time I offered an opinion on investments, Every time I demonstrated that I might understand money better than you thought, you shut me down. I turned back to the presentation, clicking through slides that showed our major acquisitions, our client growth, our industry recognition. So I stopped asking for permission, I continued. I stopped waiting for you to take me seriously. I built something that was entirely mine, something you couldn't dismiss or minimize or take credit for. Harrison Ford, who had been unusually quiet during our family confrontation, suddenly stood up. "This is all very touching," he said sarcastically. "But I'm not going down without a fight. I'll contest this acquisition. I'll claim fraud, manipulation. You'll claim whatever you want," I said calmly, not even bothering to look at him. "But the papers are already signed, the board has already approved the sale, and your own shareholders are celebrating the news." Bob stepped forward with a tablet. "Actually, Harrison, you might want to see this." He showed Ford the screen, which displayed real-time stock prices. Ford Industries stock had jumped 30% since news of the acquisition broke. "Your shareholders are making more money today than they have in the past 2 years under your leadership," Bob continued. "They're not going to support any legal challenges to a deal that's already making them rich." Ford stared at the numbers, his face cycling through emotions, anger, disbelief, and finally defeat. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "Actually, it is," I said, finally turning to look at him directly. "Your company is now part of Thompson Capital Management's portfolio. Your services are no longer required. Security will escort you out." As if summoned, two security officers appeared at the conference room door. Ford looked around the room one last time, perhaps hoping for support, but found only reporters eager to document his downfall and board members who were clearly relieved to see him go. After Ford was escorted out, the room felt lighter somehow. The reporters continued taking notes and photos, but the main drama was over. Now came the harder part, dealing with my family. The aftermath. The private dining room adjacent to the conference room felt intimate after the chaos of the press conference. Just me, David, and Sarah, sitting around a small table with the weight of 28 years of marriage and 25 years of motherhood between us. Sarah spoke first, her voice small and uncertain. "How much of our life was real?" I reached across the table to touch her hand, but she pulled back slightly. The rejection stung, but I understood it. "All of it was real," I said. "Every cookie I baked, every school play I attended, every time I helped you with homework or stayed up when you were sick, all of that was real. I just happened to also be running a $1 billion company." "But you lied to us," David said. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired. "For 7 years, you lied." I omitted. I corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Sarah looked up at me, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Mom, I told people you were boring. I was embarrassed by you. I told my friends you were just a housewife who didn't understand the modern world." The pain in her voice almost broke my heart. "Sweetheart, and all this time, you were more successful than any of their parents. You were more successful than me, than Dad, than anyone I know." She wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you help me when I was struggling with my career plans?" This was the question I'd been dreading. "Because you didn't ask," I said quietly. "You never asked for my advice about business or careers or investments. You assumed I wouldn't understand. Because you let us assume that." "No," I said more firmly. "I let you reveal who you really thought I was." And it hurt, Sarah. It hurt every single time you dismissed my opinions or acted embarrassed by my existence. David leaned back in his chair, looking older than his 55 years. "So this is revenge? You built a secret empire to punish us for underestimating you?" I considered the question seriously. "Maybe it started that way," I admitted. "Maybe the first few deals were motivated by anger. But it became something more than that. It became proof that I was more than what you needed me to be. What we needed you to be." Sarah's voice rose. "Mom, we needed you to be our mother. We needed you to be honest with us. I was your mother. I am your mother. Nothing about that has changed." I leaned forward, trying to make them understand. "But I was also dying inside, being nothing but your mother and David's wife." I needed to be Margaret Thompson, not just Maggie who bakes cookies and picks up dry cleaning. The silence stretched between us. Through the dining room windows, I could see the city bustling below, oblivious to the small family drama playing out 32 floors above. Finally, David spoke. I feel like I don't know you at all. You know me, I said. You just never bothered to wonder if there might be more to know. That's not fair, isn't it? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. David, how many times in the past month have you asked me about my day? He stared at the phone, confused. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. You ask Sarah about her classes, her job search, her goals. You talk about your work, your challenges, your achievements. But when's the last time you asked me what I did with my day? What I'm thinking about? What I want? David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He couldn't remember because it hadn't happened. I ask about your day, Sarah said defensively. No, you don't, I replied gently. You ask if dinner will be ready on time. You ask if I picked up your dry cleaning. You ask if I remembered to record your show. You've never once asked me what I want to do with my life or what makes me happy or what I'm passionate about. Sarah's face crumpled. Because I thought you were happy. I thought being our mom and running the house was enough for you. It wasn't, I said simply. I love being your mother. I love taking care of our family. But I needed more than that, and you both made it clear that wanting more made me ungrateful. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my secret empire. Do you remember when I suggested we invest in that renewable energy startup 5 years ago? I asked without turning around. Vaguely, David said. You laughed. You actually laughed and said, leave the investing to people who understand business. I turned back to face them. That startup is now worth $800 million. I invested in it through Thompson Capital, and our return has been extraordinary. David's face went pale. I didn't mean. You meant exactly that. And Sarah, remember when I tried to give you advice about your career path last year? I suggested you consider finance or investment management. Sarah nodded slowly. You told me that business was too complicated for someone like you, and that you didn't want to end up stuck at home like mom. I sat back down, my voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I could have told you that I was already doing exactly what you were afraid to try. Instead, I watched you struggle with career decisions while I sat on knowledge that could have helped you. Why didn't you help me anyway? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. Because you didn't want help from someone you saw as a failure, I replied. You wanted help from successful people, people who mattered. In your mind, I wasn't one of those people. The truth hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. Kate appeared in the doorway. Maggie, the press is asking for a follow-up statement, and there are calls coming in from major media outlets wanting interviews. I looked at my family, David staring at the table, Sarah wiping her eyes, both of them processing a reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about their lives. Tell them I'll be available for interviews next week, I said to Kate. Right now, I need to be with my family. After Kate left, David finally looked up at me. What happens now? Now you decide, I said. You decide whether you can love and respect the woman I actually am, not just the version of me that made you comfortable. Of course I love you. Do you? I interrupted. Because for the past 7 years, you've been in love with an illusion. You've been married to a woman who doesn't exist, the simple, uncomplicated housewife who's content to live in your shadow. David looked stricken. I never wanted you to live in my shadow. Then why did you put me there? I asked. Every time I showed ambition, every time I demonstrated intelligence, every time I suggested I might be capable of more than household management, you found a way to redirect me back to my proper role. Sarah spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. I did the same thing, didn't I? I nodded. You did. But Sarah, you're 25. You have your whole life ahead of you to figure out how to see people, especially women, as complex human beings with multiple dimensions. And Dad? I looked at my husband of 28 years, this man who had never quite seen me as an equal partner. Your father is 55. Change is harder at 55. David straightened in his chair. I can change. I want to change. Maggie, I had no idea. I never realized. That's the problem, I said softly. You never realized because you never looked. For 28 years, you've been married to someone you never bothered to truly see. 3 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of my office, my real office, not the converted bedroom I'd been calling my craft room. David sat across from my desk, reviewing the financial reports I'd finally started sharing with him. The Yamamoto deal closed yesterday, I told him, watching his reaction. It still felt strange, including him in my business life after so many years of separation. 40 million? He asked, looking up from the papers. 42, actually. The final negotiations went better than expected. David shook his head in amazement. I still can't wrap my mind around the numbers. 3 months of counseling had helped, though we still had a long way to go. Dr. Peterson, our therapist, had been clear that rebuilding trust after such a fundamental deception or omission, as I prefer to call it, would take years, not months. How was Sarah's presentation yesterday? David asked, changing the subject to safer ground. I smiled, feeling that familiar surge of pride. Brilliant. The board approved her proposal unanimously. Sarah had started working at Thompson Capital Management 6 weeks earlier, insisting on beginning at entry level despite my offers to fast track her into management. She was determined to prove herself on her own merits, something I deeply respected. She gets it from you, David said quietly. She gets it from both of us, I corrected. Your methodical approach to problem solving, my willingness to take calculated risks. It was true. As painful as the revelation had been for our family, it had also opened up space for more honest conversations about all our strengths and weaknesses. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mrs. Thompson, your 10M is here. Send them in, I replied, standing as Sarah entered with her laptop and presentation materials. Ready for the quarterly review? She asked. All business. The professional distance she maintained during work hours was another thing I respected about her approach. Ready, I confirmed. As Sarah set up her presentation, David gathered his things to leave. I'll see you both at home for dinner, he said, pausing at the door. Maggie, thank you for trusting me with the Yamamoto details. After he left, Sarah looked at me curiously. How's it going? The sharing your work life thing? Harder than I expected, I admitted. After 7 years of keeping business and home separate, it feels strange to blend them. But good strange? I considered the question. Mostly good. Your father is trying, really trying, to see me differently. But some habits are hard to break. Sarah nodded, understanding. Her own process of reconciling the mother she'd known with the CEO she discovered had been equally complex. For what it's worth, she said, I think you were right to keep it secret. This surprised me. Really? Really. If you told us from the beginning, we might have found other ways to diminish your success. We might have said you were lucky, or that you had help, or that it was different because you didn't have real responsibilities. She was probably right. The revelation had been shocking enough to force genuine examination of their assumptions. A gradual disclosure might have allowed them to rationalize away my achievements. But I'm glad it's over, Sarah continued. I'm glad I finally get to know who my mother really is. As she launched into her quarterly presentation, I reflected on how much had changed. The secrecy was gone, but so was the protection it had provided. Now my family knew exactly who I was, both the nurturing mother and the ruthless CEO. Some days, they seemed awed by the combination. Other days, they seemed overwhelmed by it. But for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't editing myself to fit their expectations. I wasn't hiding my intelligence or downplaying my ambitions. I was whole. The new normal, that evening, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this story had begun, preparing dinner while simultaneously reviewing investment portfolios on my tablet. The multitasking that had once been secret was now openly acknowledged. Need help? David asked, appearing in the doorway still wearing his work clothes. I've got it, I replied, not looking up from the tablet where I was analyzing a potential acquisition in Singapore. Important deal? Potentially. I showed him the screen. Tech startup with promising applications in renewable energy storage. The numbers look good, but I want to dig deeper into their patent protections. David studied the information with the attention he'd never given my work before. What's the timeline? Fast. If we're going to move, it needs to be within the next 48 hours. Sarah walked in from the living room, having changed out of her work clothes into comfortable jeans and a sweater. Are we talking about the Singapore thing? You reviewed the file? I asked. This morning. I think there are some red flags in their supply chain management that we should investigate before committing. David looked between us, still adjusting to these casual business conversations happening in our domestic space. You two talk about work at home now? We talk about everything at home now, I said, finally looking at him directly. No more compartments, remember? That was the deal. It was the deal we made in counseling, complete transparency moving forward, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially when it was uncomfortable. Right, David said, though I could see him struggling with the adjustment. 28 years of thinking he was the primary breadwinner didn't disappear overnight. As we sat down to dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Kate. Forbes wants to do a cover story. The Invisible CO. How one woman built a billion-dollar empire while everyone thought she was just a housewife. I showed the message to David and Sarah. You should do it, Sarah said immediately. This story needs to be told. David was quiet for a moment, then nodded. She's right. Other women probably need to hear this. I studied his face, looking for signs of the resentment or embarrassment that might come with having his wife become more publicly successful than him. Instead, I saw something that looked like pride. You're okay with me being the face of Thompson Capital? I asked. With everyone knowing that your wife is worth more money than you'll make in several lifetimes? David set down his fork and looked at me seriously. Maggie, 3 months ago, I thought I was married to someone who needed me to take care of her. Now I know I'm married to someone who's been taking care of all of us while building something extraordinary. If that makes some people think less of me, that's their problem. It was the most mature thing he'd said about our situation since the revelation. Besides, he continued with a slight smile, being married to a billionaire has its perks. I've been thinking about early retirement. Sarah laughed, the first genuinely relaxed laugh I'd heard from her in months. Dad, you're 55. What would you do with early retirement? Travel. Read. Maybe take some classes. He looked at me. Maybe help my wife with her empire, if she'll have me. The offer surprised me. What do you mean? I mean, maybe I could be useful. I know you don't need me for the high-level strategy stuff, but I'm good with details, with organization. Maybe there's a place for an old banker in your operation. I considered this. The idea of working directly with David was both appealing and terrifying. Our marriage was still fragile, still healing. Adding professional collaboration might help or might create new tensions. We could try it, I said carefully. Maybe start with small projects, see how it goes. I'd like that, David said. I'd like to be part of what you've built instead of being threatened by it. Sarah raised her water glass. To new beginnings? To honest beginnings, I corrected, raising mine. To the end of the secret life of Margaret Thompson, David added. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt like we might actually make this work. Not the same way we'd worked before. That version of our family had been built on incomplete information and unexamined assumptions. But this new version, built on truth and mutual respect, might be stronger than what we'd had before. My phone buzzed again. Bob, with updates on 3 different deals, Kate with legal questions, and my assistant with tomorrow's schedule. The empire that had once been secret was now very much public, and the demands were constant. But as I looked at my family and really looked at them, without hiding or pretense, I realized that the most important acquisition I'd ever made wasn't a company or a portfolio. It was myself. Epilogue. 1 year later. The podium lights were bright, but I could still see faces in the audience as I prepared to deliver the keynote address at the National Women's Business Conference. Somewhere in the crowd, David and Sarah were sitting together, both of them genuinely proud to be there. A year ago, I began. If someone had told me I'd be standing here speaking to you about success and authenticity, I would have laughed. Not because I wasn't successful, I was running a $4 billion investment firm. I would have laughed because nobody knew I was successful. The audience was silent, attentive. For 7 years, I lived two completely separate lives. By day, I was Margaret Thompson, CEO. By evening, I was Maggie, the housewife who baked cookies and attended PTA meetings. I thought I was protecting my family by keeping these worlds separate. What I was really doing was protecting their egos at the expense of my own authenticity. I paused, finding David's face in the crowd. He gave me an encouraging nod. The most dangerous thing about hiding your success isn't the secrecy itself. It's the way it teaches everyone around you, including yourself, that who you really are isn't acceptable. The applause was strong, but I continued. Today, I want to talk about the courage it takes to be whole, to refuse to edit yourself to make others comfortable, to insist on being seen for who you really are, even when that reality challenges other people's assumptions about your worth. After the speech, at the reception, I was approached by dozens of women with similar stories. Women who had been hiding their intelligence, their ambitions, their successes to avoid threatening the people they loved. How do you do it? One woman asked. How do you balance being successful with being loved? You don't balance them, I replied. You insist on both. You find people who can love you for your success, not despite it. Later, driving home with David, I reflected on how much had changed. Thompson Capital Management was more successful than ever. Sarah had proven herself as a capable analyst and was being considered for a promotion, and David had found his niche managing our operational logistics. But more importantly, I no longer felt like I was living two different lives. I was just living one life, fully and authentically. Good speech, David said as we pulled into our driveway. Thanks. I looked at our house, the same house where I'd spent years hiding who I was. Do you ever miss it? The way things were before? David considered the question seriously. I miss feeling important, he said honestly. I miss thinking I was the one taking care of everyone. But I don't miss being married to someone who was pretending to be less than she was. Inside, Sarah was waiting with a bottle of champagne and news of her own. I got the promotion, she announced. Senior analyst, effective immediately. As we celebrated Sarah's success, I realized that this, all of us being proud of each other's achievements instead of threatened by them, was what I'd been searching for all along. The secret life of Margaret Thompson was over. The authentic life had begun.